Jamaicans have known how to grow and smoke weed since them say Wappy kill Philip. My constituency grew the best weed up in the hills of Calderwood. 8 Mile, 9 Mile, Higgins Land. Yes, not St. Elizabeth. Because my farmers know good weed and know how to grow it. But in less than 5 years, there'll be very little value in growing weed in Jamaica. It'll be like any other commodity. The true value in the future of ganja, cannabis, and I call it ganja because I don't want the world to take away our brand, will be in pharmaceuticals and branding. But today, no small farmer with historical know-how will ever meet the standards now required for production. The licensing authority is approaching it as if every applicant wants to become an exporter. This established bureaucracy is locking out our small farmers, Mr. Speaker. The same one who created the product so many years ago and suffered at the hands of the police for something which is now a and is legal in several countries have no way of getting a slice of that taste. It's them do it, it's them build it. If those small farmers never go up in the hills for 3-4 months and sit down and hide, you wouldn't know about Jamaican good ganja. Straight. The government must establish and fund a facility in partnership with one of our universities to allow small farmers to manufacture and process their raw weed for a fee into products that the market demands. This must be a national lab. It must be a national Jamaican lab. So when the Israelis or the Coloradians or anybody else hear about it, they must know that they can come to the Jamaican National Ganja Labs. This lab must have the added responsibility of promoting Jamaican ganja, the best in the world. We need to stand up for our right? We need to stand up for it. We have the competitive advantage of branding of this product in the world, but this is disappearing fast, and I don't want to see it disappear. All of us have an obligation to make sure that we don't see it disappear. Good God, Mr. Speaker, that is a contradiction in terms. And Mr. Speaker, I want to suggest that the contradiction in that statement is a major source of our poor export performance and economic growth over many years. In theory, Mr. Speaker, import substitution gives the producer a guaranteed local market with the expectation that he or she will use that market to become more efficient and then export. But in reality, this only creates monopolies that incentivize local producers to take advantage of the local market through higher prices while ignoring the export market. This only ensures that ordinary Jamaicans are driven further and further away from prosperity. This is why, over the last 50 years, Jamaicans' per capita income have grown marginally, while those in places like Singapore and Dubai have increased by multiples of 100. Their success lay in their vision of the world as their trading market. So what they do is that they facilitate their local businesses to trade with that market and not the other way around. The world today, Mr. Speaker, is radically different than it was in the 1950s. And we need to understand and have a new attitude designed for the success in that marketplace. What does the world look like, Mr. Speaker? Today, buyers and sellers don't have to interact with each other. I can stay right here in Parliament, talk to manufacturers in China, purchase my goods online and have them delivered right to my doorstep in Jamaica. I don't even have to step my foot in China. Technology and automation have taken over physical labor. Machines can produce 4 billion quart bottles of engine oil in Nigeria, Lagos, annually, using only 15 people to run the factory floor, and I've seen it myself. The machines that are now being used for automation can churn out billions annually. Global companies now dominate world trade and are merging to get bigger and more influential with a higher degree of specialization. Volkswagen has bought Audi and Porsche. A family business, a Brazilian family business, now owns Heinz, Kraft, Budweiser, Corona, Miller, and 397 other beer brands, including Banks Brewery in Barbados. That particular company, and it's a family-owned company in Brazil, has sales in excess of 100 billion US dollars. That's 13 trillion Jamaican dollars. By comparison, Jamaica's GDP in 2016 was 14 billion. 14 billion, 1.28 trillion, 1/8 of that family business's sales, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, despite Jamaica's leadership in having the first refrigerated banana ship sailing from our shores to the UK in 1901, and the refrigerated container having been invented in 1930, our agricultural exports have not really changed over the last 100 years. Mr. Speaker, no country has ever created true wealth for its people without access to export markets, both in goods and in services. And Jamaica will never create true prosperity for our 3 million people by only selling to our 3 million people. It's not possible. Mr. Speaker, China's population of 1,300,000,000, more than 4 times the size of the United States of America. Our market of 3 million people certainly does nothing really in any meaningful way to advance the Chinese economy. But consider this, Mr. Speaker. If Jamaica just had one product, just one, and said we were going to now market to 5% of the Chinese population, 65 million people, one product to target 65 million purchasers at $20 per product, per person, per annum, that would amount to $130 million or 17 trillion Jamaican dollars in annual sales. Mr. Speaker, in Beijing and Shanghai, there's a coffee shop on every corner. Globally, people consume 2.4 billion cups of coffee every day. So why not coffee in retail packaging? And why aren't we selling it to China online? How is it, and why must we continue to sell beans instead of other finished goods and products? As leaders, we must facilitate the creation of value-added coffee products right here in Jamaica for export. And the Coffee Board must stop treating small coffee farmers like slaves and allow them to do their own foreign marketing and trade. Regulation and certification, yes. Suffocation, no, Mr. Speaker. And we must allow our coffee farmers to now take advantage of that market. Dubai's population at the time of Jamaica's independence, Mr. Speaker, was 47,000 people. Today it is 2.7 million people with a GDP of 120 billion, 6% of which comes from oil. The majority of their GDP comes from tourism, trade, and commerce. And by comparison, when Jamaica in 2016 exported 1.4 billion or 182 billion Jamaican dollars, Dubai non-oil exports, Mr. Speaker, was exporting $140 billion worth of goods and services. That is about 18.2 trillion Jamaican dollars. Our import substitution policy, which is broad-based and still being pursued today, is a dead-end road. So we have this policy in place since the 1950s, when the world was very, very different. Over the last 10 years, we consistently import 2 to 4 times more than we export. In 2017, it was 5.8 billion imported and 1.3 billion exported. Can't do that trade imbalance, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Jamaica needs a radical mindset shift. We must begin to think of ourselves as value-added, a value-added export country. We also need to realize that we can't be all things to all people. We must focus on products through which we have a worldwide competitive advantage. To succeed in any one of them at just 1% market share of the world would transform Jamaica to the country we all say we want to live in and yearn to live in. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm here not to criticize, but to give recommendations. Here are some recommendations on how Jamaica can actually grow through exports. Music and art. If we were to ask a question, Mr. Speaker, what has music done for Jamaica? The answers would be unending. However, if I was to ask musicians, what has Jamaica done for them? The majority, if not all, would say not much. What have they done? They've done everything basically on their own. Recently in Kingston, I attended one of the most professionally organized and satisfying and gratifying musical performances, owned and managed by Jamaicans. Every hotel in Kingston was full. Every airline seat coming into Jamaica was booked. Mr. Speaker, if Butcher Banton was listed as an export company, his shows alone in the last month in Jamaica, Nassau, Trinidad, and Barbados would put him in the top 20 Jamaican exports. Had he been a hotel or an export manufacturing entity, he would qualify for significant incentives and waivers. Neither he nor any other artist receives these kinds of incentives. Additionally, foreign entities coming to set up for shows can bring their technology and equipment to our shores duty-free because they're taking them back out. But our producers, sound engineers, lighting technicians, digital content providers, stage managers, artists have to pay the import duties, the GCT, and other charges for equipment purchased. If you understand the industry, Mr. Speaker, people aren't buying this equipment for the most part to sell it, but rather to enhance their talents and earning capacity. Whatever import tax revenue loss the country may suffer is minuscule compared to the potential earnings and pride and marketing these artists bring to Jamaica. How can we be satisfied that a potential drummer in my constituency of Southeast St. Ann or in West Rural St. Andrew can't afford the entry or the tools of trade, whether he wants to set up a makeshift studio at his house or her house and to properly develop his talents? Mr. Speaker, we have not designed this economy to properly develop and equip industry. Yet his artistry is already recognized as coming from a country that produces the world's best. So, Mr. Speaker, the technology for artist production is moving fast. A 3-year-old soundboard is almost obsolete today. And if you know what a soundboard is, I think the member from St. Catherine would know what a soundboard is. When you go into a studio and you're going to mix down the music, everything now is computerized. So the soundboard checks everything. Those things are moving fast. The computer technology, everything. So as fast as they can bring it and do it, everything is changing. Therefore, I'm making a formal call for musicians, artists, dancers, sculptors, all artisans of the creative and entertainment industry to be seen as foreign exchange earners for Jamaica, and as such should benefit from the tax waivers and incentives on the tools of their trade. I want to reinforce our call for the amendment of the Noise Abatement Act and to lend our support for that, as well as the building of permanent concert venues. Mr. Speaker, medical tourism is valued at $120 billion US, with more than 2.5 million people traveling all over the world to get medical procedures. Why? Because of cost. So what is happening now is that people are leaving first world countries for procedures that would normally cost $11,000 US. They can get it in overseas jurisdictions for about a fraction of the cost, anywhere between $1,500 to $2,000 US. And so they're going to Cayman, Panama, Dom Rep, Mexico, Brazil, Jamaica, India for knee surgery. Jamaica is already ideally located to take advantage of the worldwide growth in this area. But let's go all in. We keep talking about these platitudes and cliches. I've been here for 12 years, I keep hearing them. When I mean go all in, design the economy, and let's dive in head or first. There are no shades of gray. It's either black or white. And so I want us to provide incentives for doctors or estheticians or registered nurses or dentists or nutritionists or physiotherapists or chiropractors, and to make it work, to make medical tourism work, Minister. I have an excellent dermatologist who could expand her customer base in skincare to an overseas visitor market if she could be given the incentives to bring in the latest technology to be at first world standard. Mr. Speaker, we don't lack the expertise in Jamaica. We never have. What we lack is the courage and leadership and political will for both sides to take the decision to make it happen. Mr. Speaker, retirement villages is something that I've seen across the world. And I want to congratulate Jamaican developers who actually build facilities and have places like in St. Ann, etc. where persons use those residences as their second homes. And people are using these residences not only as Airbnb, but the retirement homes. A more idyllic setting for one's retirement other than Jamaica just can't be found. I don't care what anybody else has to say. No, we're no better than Jamaica. Straight. Our proximity to the US market and our easy travel gateways are other advantages. Cold weather, high costs of living, and high health costs in the first world countries are leading others and many people to seek retirement options in Panama, in Mexico, and Costa Rica. They have created industries and villages for overseas retirement with the average housing cost being about $30,000 US. Orlando has over 100,000 of these retirement homes in a particular area. Trelawney, St. Anne, and Hanover are best suited for these retirement villages. And how would you fund it? How would the government fund it, Minister of Finance? Have the NIS made money this year. Have the NIS or the NHT float a diaspora bond. And the money that you make back from the sales and the rental in raising the money overseas, pay back the bondholders. But let's just do it. There's land across St. Anne, Hanover, and Trelawney. And I guarantee you, if you start providing the kinds of jobs and the kind of foreign exchange earnings, not only do you increase and build your economy, but you actually have crime, and that will go down in those particular areas. Mr. Speaker, tourism for Jamaica has always done well. But we still have a far way to go, and I'm glad that I spoke after the Minister of Tourism today. Our emphasis must be on increasing the average spend per tourist while in Jamaica and increasing the available offerings to the weekend tourist market, and once again, attracting the luxury visitor. And I want to congratulate the Minister for some of the work that he's doing. He has known me from I was a tot. Still, Mr. Speaker, too many of our guests are being kept in their hotel rooms. TEF needs to help communities create more authentic tourist attractions. Tourists, Mr. Speaker, spend money on shopping and entertainment. I'm suggesting basically two things. One, Jamaica goes head-to-head with Panama. Establish a duty-free free zone. Let them come shop in Jamaica, pay the import duties as they leave. You can put it up in Trelawney. You can put it anywhere that we have land close to some of our international airports. But there's another thing I want to recommend, because when people go to visit a place, they're not going to visit and say, oh, I stayed at this hotel or that hotel. Yeah, that's important. But they're going for the experience. So people don't say, well, when I went to Disney World, some of them can't remember the hotel they stayed at. In the year 2000, the Member of Parliament for North East St. Anne at the time, Danny Melville, in his sectoral address, spoke to the need for more attractions. He said, and I quote, Seville Great House, for example, on its own, the cultural attraction is not enough. It must be a part of an entertainment package. Harken back to the medieval dining experience in Orlando, we need to seek out the assistance from experts in building theme entertainment. Ask Disney or Universal Studios to show us how to create an illusion built around the rich cultural heritage of the meeting point of our indigenous Taino gate-crashing, European and imported African cultures at Seville, and how to sell that grand illusion to tourists. What we have here is an industry that must rely on creativity and imagery, not just the bare bones of historical and cultural significance. End of quote. As Minister of Culture, I helped to turn Seville into a museum. But 19 years later, Danny Melville's vision of the Seville package is yet to become a reality. All of us in here can't keep coming back year after year. I could have, the speech that I read from Danny Melville 19 years ago, it would be relevant today. It is really an indictment on us as legislators to really keep just pushing the economy in the same way that we've been pushing it. Time come, man, we could just do something and go all in and get it done. Mr. Speaker, agriculture. No, the government has the money, we can't find it. And we can do it. Mr. Speaker, agriculture employs over 220,000 people and has the highest local value added of all industries. Raw materials and production are almost 100% local. However, we have failed in the last 50 years to improve the quality of life for the average Jamaican small farmer. largely because we have focused on the wrong crops and we don't do any agri-processing for major export or sale to the local hotels. We need to recalibrate the way the Ministry of Agriculture technocrats see the business of food. And the way legislators implement policy. Jamaica has over 50 products which have United States pre-clearance. Let's just choose 10 of them. Just choose 10 of the 50 and produce and give the farmers two things in principle: an ongoing guaranteed price for their goods, for their crops, and secondary processing to provide storage for processed goods for export. Just two things. Choose 10 of the 50 and let's just go all in and export it to make some money. Why am I buying cured mango strips from Indonesia and not the Jamaican equivalent? Why am I buying aloe and coconut water being produced somewhere else, imported back to Jamaica? Why am I asking the same questions 12 years later over and over and over again in this parliament? I've been asking the same thing over. You have been asking the same thing over and over. Don't matter. You have to start. Government must sit down one and one, regardless of if it's coconut or mango, whatever it is, we can choose. Government must sit down one-on-one with companies and do what is necessary to facilitate the establishment of these export facilities. Because of the actions of former Minister of Finance Peter Phillips in bringing interest rates down, pension funds and insurance companies are scrambling to look for investments in the real economies. Of former Minister of Finance Peter Phillips in bringing interest rates down, pension funds and insurance companies are scrambling to look for investments in the real economy. These companies who are now importing these types of products with established markets locally need to list on the local stock exchange companies to manufacture agricultural finished products. Let's give those special incentives to these companies that list on the stock exchange for agricultural purposes, having regard to the significant value added they will create for small farmers. Mr. Speaker, this is the new growth product of the 21st century: ganja, cannabis, kaya. Call it what you want to call it. Ganja, Jamaicans have known how to grow and smoke weed since them say Wapi kill Philip. My constituency grew the best weed up in the hills of Calderwood. 8 Mile, 9 Mile, Higgins land. Yes, not St. Elizabeth. My farmers. Mr. Speaker, my farmers know good weed and know how to grow it. But in less than 5 years, there'll be very little value in growing weed in Jamaica. It will be like any other commodity. The true value in the future of ganja, cannabis, and I call it ganja because I don't want the world to take away our brand, will be in pharmaceuticals and branding. But today, no small farmer with historical know-how will ever meet the standards now required for production. The licensing authority is approaching it as if every applicant wants to become an exporter. This established bureaucracy is locking out our small farmers, Mr. Speaker. The same one who created the product so many years ago and suffered at the hands of the police for something which is now a global sensation and is legal in several countries have no way of getting a slice of that taste. It's them do it, it's them build it. If those small farmers never go up in the hills for 3-4 months and sit down and hide, you wouldn't know about Jamaican good ganja. Straight. The government must establish and fund a facility in partnership with one of our universities to allow small farmers to manufacture and process their raw weed for a fee. Into products that the market demands. This must be a national lab. It must be a national Jamaican lab. So when the Israelis or the Coloradians or anybody else hear about it, they must know that they can come to the Jamaican National Ganja Lab. And Mr. Speaker, this lab must have the added responsibility of promoting Jamaican ganja. the best in the world. Mr. Speaker, we need to stand up for our ganja brand, right? We need to stand up for it. We have the competitive advantage of branding of this product in the world, but this is disappearing fast, and I don't want to see it disappear. All of us have an obligation to make sure that we don't see it disappear. Mr. Speaker, I had hoped to end my presentation on this high, but there's something else that I'm extremely passionate about, which is Jamaica and Jamaicans first. Mr. Speaker, we live in a God-blessed country. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Just like.
Mr. Speaker, I ask that the members' time be extended sufficient to allow her to complete her presentation.
Those in favour? Those against? Ayes have it. Ms. Hanna.
Thank you, member. Mr. Speaker, we all live in a God-blessed country, and every day I give thanks to be born Jamaican. I do. I really do. We should welcome everyone to our shores and encourage them to enjoy our country. However, it must come at a price. In the United States, they have something called a minority affirmative action plan, which recognizes that we're all equal under God. However, we're all not blessed with equal opportunity. It is difficult to expect the average Jamaican living in poor circumstances without the best education to compete with the skill sets of the newly arrived foreign investor, wholesaler, or technician. I am therefore recommending two things in principle. One, there needs to be a differential in the licensing fees for locals and foreigners who wish to do business in Jamaica. And that differential, Mr. Speaker, must be favorable on both sides, but make sure that there is a differential. Number two, as a requirement for all work permits above a certain level, a condition should be imposed that a Jamaican must be employed for understudy for a period not less than 2 years. So if you're coming in to invest and you say that, look, you don't have this talent or expertise here, no problem. You can bring your expertise, but you have to put a Jamaican beside you, and they have to understudy you in 2 years, and then your person has to actually go. Those are the two condition precedences, so the knowledge transfer is important. Mr. Speaker, James Ingram has a song which says, just once, can we figure out what we keep doing wrong? Why we never last for very long? Just once, can we find a way to finally make it right? To make the magic last for more than just one night? If we could just get through it. I know we could break through it. Mr. Speaker, in Jamaica we have JAMPRO, we have the Economic Growth Council, we have the Ministry of Economic Growth, we have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Coordinating Unit for Foreign Trade, we have the Ministry of Agriculture, and I could go on. What we need is less bureaucracy and not more. The trade policy confirms on page 53, and I quote, for the majority of the last 50 years, imports have generally increased, while exports of goods have remained relatively stable. This is not a formula for success, Mr. Speaker. This is not a formula for prosperity. I'll end as I began. Our mindset as legislators need to radically change towards becoming a value-added export country. We also need to realize that we can't be all things to all people. We must focus on products through which we have a worldwide competitive advantage in. To succeed in any one of them, just one, and have even 1% market share would transform Jamaica to a country we all say we desire. Mr. Speaker, we've been approaching the concept of national growth and development in the same way for 30-odd years. The time has come to take a different path. Let's try something new, just once. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, it is fair to say that that was Indeed, an excellent presidency.